It started with something small. A single folded letter slipped under the front door, stamped with the seal of the Homeowners Association. At first glance, it looked routine, another generic reminder about parking rules or holiday decorations. But inside was a demand that felt personal, targeted, and unnecessarily harsh. The letter claimed that the small flower beds in front of the house violated HOA guidelines. According to them, the plants were non-conforming, disrupting the uniform look of the neighborhood. It wasn't as though the front yard was wild or messy. In fact, the plants had been carefully chosen. Lavender, hibiscus, a row of bright marigolds, nothing invasive, nothing dangerous. Still, the HOA had decided it was a problem. Behind that letter wasn't just regulation. It was pressure, fueled by whispers from a few board members who thought uniformity was more important than individuality. They wanted lawns mowed to the exact same height, the same 2 trees planted in the same spot, and no color outside of muted greens and browns. A personal garden broke the illusion of control, and that was something they wouldn't tolerate. The first reaction was disbelief, followed by frustration. The plants weren't harming anyone. They weren't blocking sidewalks or attracting pests. They were just flowers. But the HOA insisted that all of them be removed within 2 weeks. If not, fines would begin, $50 a day, escalating to legal action if ignored. That night, the garden was walked through slowly. The fragrance of jasmine filled the air, soft petals brushing against fingertips. It was impossible to see these plants as violations. They were life, color, and expression. Yet the HOA had reduced them to a nuisance, a problem to be eliminated. At first, there was temptation to comply just to make the problem go away. But something about the unfairness lit a spark. Why should individuality be erased for the sake of rigid conformity? Why should beauty be punished? Instead of shrinking back, a new idea began to take root. If they wanted control, they would get defiance. It wouldn't just be a fight to keep the plants, it would become something bigger, something louder, something they couldn't ignore. The yard wouldn't be trimmed down to fit their rules. It would be transformed into something so breathtaking, so undeniable, that the HOA's demands would collapse under the weight of public attention. The notice was taped to the refrigerator that night, not as a warning but as a reminder. The countdown had begun. 2 weeks to tear it all down, or 2 weeks to turn the seed of rebellion into something extraordinary. And so the plan for the backyard jungle was born. The first week passed in quiet preparation. Trips to nurseries and garden centers filled the days. Truckloads of soil, gravel, bamboo fencing, and exotic plants arrived in steady waves. Neighbors peered out from their windows, some curious, others suspicious. The HOA board members, who drove past with slow glares, could sense something brewing, but they had no idea how far it would go. The backyard became a construction zone. Grass was stripped away to make room for winding stone pathways. Raised beds appeared, filled with tropical ferns and palms. A small pond was dug, lined with smooth rocks, and filled with koi fish that flashed like jewels in the water. It wasn't just a garden anymore, it was an ecosystem. A place where vines could climb, where butterflies could land, where every inch of space told a story of life thriving against restriction. Work stretched late into the nights. Solar lanterns were placed along the paths, casting soft golden glows that made the new jungle shimmer after dark. Each day, the HOA deadline inched closer, and with it came a growing sense of triumph. What had started as an act of defiance was turning into something extraordinary. Then came the day the HOA made their inspection. Clipboards in hand, board members filed into the backyard expecting to see compliance or failure. What they saw instead stunned them into silence. Towering greenery surrounded them, thick bamboo rustled in the wind, and bursts of tropical flowers lined every path. It wasn't messy, it wasn't chaotic, it was intentional, designed, beautiful. But beauty wasn't enough for the HOA. They left quickly, muttering about citations and rule violations. Within hours, another letter arrived. This time, it was harsher. Remove all non-approved landscaping within 48 hours. Fines will begin immediately. Instead of panicking, cameras were set up. Pictures and videos captured every detail of the backyard jungle. The vibrant colors, the tranquil pond, the lush canopy of green. A short clip was uploaded online that evening, showing what the HOA wanted to destroy. By morning, the video had spread. Comments poured in, thousands of people siding with the jungle over the rigid rules of the HOA. Words like paradise, masterpiece, and why would anyone want this gone flooded the screen. The story was no longer private. The HOA had picked a battle in the shadows, but now the world was watching. And as the backyard jungle grew, so did its audience. By the third week, the backyard was no longer just a garden, it was a landmark. Cars slowed down on the street, people stopped to peek over the fence, and strangers began leaving notes of admiration at the front door. The HOA tried to double down with more threats, more fines, and even the possibility of legal action. But their power was slipping. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines framed it as HOA versus the backyard jungle. Local reporters arrived with cameras, capturing the vibrant green sanctuary and broadcasting it to the evening news. Suddenly, what the HOA had hoped to suppress had become the pride of the community. Supporters rallied online. A petition demanding the HOA revoke its fines gathered tens of thousands of signatures in days. Comment sections overflowed with outrage toward the board and praise for the transformation. Some even visited in person, taking photos against the lush backdrop. The pressure mounted until the HOA had no choice but to hold a formal meeting. Residents packed the hall, voices buzzing with frustration. Many had their own complaints about arbitrary rules, about favoritism, about how individuality had been stripped away. The jungle had become a symbol of something bigger, resistance against control. By the end of the meeting, the vote was clear. The fines were cancelled, the demand for removal was rescinded, and the HOA quietly amended its guidelines. Homeowners would now have more freedom to cultivate their yards, so long as they maintained safety and cleanliness. The victory was more than personal. It was cultural. The backyard jungle didn't just survive, it thrived, inspiring neighbors to plant their own gardens, add splashes of color, and take pride in their spaces again. What started as one person's fight against conformity had transformed an entire neighborhood. And so the backyard jungle stood, not just as a rebellion but as a monument, a living reminder that individuality, once planted, can grow beyond fences, beyond rules, and beyond fear. The HOA had tried to ban a garden. Instead, they had helped create a jungle that went viral, reshaping the community forever.